Welcome to the Family Office Success Podcast, where we explore the strategies, the insights, and the best practices that help families and their advisors build and manage successful family offices. I am your host, Christy Van Wright, and each episode, we dive into the key elements of running a family office. Whether you're a family looking to structure your advisory team for long-term success, or you're a professional managing the complexities of a multi-generational enterprise. From financial oversight and operational efficiency to selecting the right advisors and creating a lasting legacy, this podcast is here to provide practical guidance and expert perspectives. Let's get started. All right. Welcome back to the Family Office Success Podcast, where we talk all things family office. Today, our guest is Michelle Castro with Heritage Auctions, and we are continuing this conversation around bringing awareness and education to the auction space. So, Michelle, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, let's start with an introduction. Give us a little bit of background about yourself, how you got into auctions, and then a little introduction into Heritage Auctions.
Great. I am the Vice President of Trust and Estates at Heritage Auctions. Our global headquarters are based in Dallas, Texas. I am originally from New Orleans. I've been in the art and/or auction world for just over 25 years. In New Orleans, I started my career off working at a fine art gallery on Royal Street. And that passion spearheaded into working in a regional auction house in New Orleans called New Orleans Auction Galleries. And I ran their fine art division for over a decade. And then my career took me to Dallas, Texas, to work for Heritage Auctions in their Trust and Estates division.
So, what is it about Heritage Auctions that really makes it different from other auction houses on the street? We've been talking to auction houses, big ones, small ones, local ones, international ones. What is it about Heritage Auctions that feels like it makes it different from other houses?
Sure. I'll give you a little background on Heritage, and that might help round out who we are in the market. We like to say we're the market leader in passion assets. We are a true collectibles auctioneer. Heritage is based in Dallas, Texas. It was started in Dallas, Texas, right around 50 years ago by coin collectors. Steve Ivy, Jim Halpern are very well known in the coin world and were collectors themselves. They're definitely coin collectors and have that passion of collecting in them. And they saw the future of this world as far as in the auction world and started taking their coin auction business to the next level and developing and opening categories such as comics, sports, fine arts. And the auction house evolved into that. And now we are a global leader in collectibles. We offer more than 50 collecting categories. And by offer, I mean we have expertise in those collecting categories. And we're still considered the world leader in coins. It's kind of fitting since that's how we started. But we stand out is definitely in collectibles. And by collectibles, I mean comic books, sports memorabilia, entertainment memorabilia, pop culture. And I know we'll get into that a little bit later in our conversation. But we are privately owned. We're based in the US. We have offices in Chicago, New York, Palm Beach, Beverly Hills, and we also have a global presence. Last year alone, our revenue was approximately $2 billion. It's interesting to see the growth because about a decade ago, when I started at Heritage, we were at 500 million a year in annual sales. So it really shows you the expansiveness and the growth in the arena as far as
Mhm.
collect. We do offer traditional categories, and in my world, in the trust and estates world, we like to say traditional as in fine art collections, sterling silver, porcelain, those things that you find that you've inherited from grandma, grandpa.
Mhm.
Those are what we call the traditional categories. So, of course, like all auction houses, we have expertise in those areas. But what makes us a little bit more different is we do have those collectible categories that we spearheaded back in the day.
Interesting. So, with heritage being Texas based, how do you feel like heritage kind of compares and contrasts to the bigger houses like Christie's or Sotheby's? Not better or worse, different.
Sure. I like to say that, we're a collectibles auction house, which means all those categories I mentioned. We like our sweet spot is that middle market where things under, I'd say, 5 million um, makes sense for us. We were the first auction house with a true internet presence, which our competitors did not see where that I mean, if you can imagine now, that's where the entire industry is. It's certainly online auctions.
Sure.
But Heritage was the first to do that. So we have that expertise in these niche markets like comic books, sports, and entertainment and pop culture. So we've carved out that niche in that collectibles market and the mid market because some of the other auction houses do have a different business model where they focus on that very, very high upper tier material, blue chip material. But Heritage saw a need in the marketplace for that mid market and it took off. I mean, collectors can buy online or bid live in our auctions and bid in our weekly sales, whether they're experienced top tier collectors or just the novice collector that's looking to buy a comic book for a couple $100 to start a collection. So that mid market base really was important for us and really spearheaded our growth. And again, we were one of the early adopters of the internet and a totally transparent business model. And by that, I mean that you were very clear. There was complete transparency in the bidding process, and you could see where something started, where the interest was in the bidding. And that appealed to a wider range of buyers and sellers, including millennials. So, it just opened up a lot of doorways for us, which now has led us to be the third largest auction house in the world.
So, something we had talked about was that how you started with coins. You've mentioned that, and then you are you one of the biggest on the comic book side now as well?
Yeah, we've got collectibles are a flourishing market. We really have set a lot of world records. There's an interesting story as far as how our coin business and our auction house evolved into these collecting categories, which was mainly started through comic books with Nicolas Cage, who who sold his comic book collection. He was a pretty avid collector of comic books. It was at this time, which was 2002, the thing you could not there was no such thing as a comic book auction. And a lot of people thought our owners were crazy for creating a category for comic books, diverting a lot of marketing dollars towards a category like that, getting the expertise hired, catalogers hired to really help build that department. Nicolas Cage was someone who wanted to sell, took a chance on heritage. We did what we needed to do to build that department the right way. And it ended up being a record selling sale in 2002. I believe it made just over 1.6 million for selling about 400 of his comic books. That was major back then. And so, when you're looking at now and you're reading about sports memorabilia, Michael Jordan sneakers, Spider-Man comics that are selling for outrageous numbers for well
Right.
above $1 million an object, I can honestly say that's where this all began. And that's where heritage really came into its own in the collectibles arena.
I think that's so cool. And I think it speaks to, that generations want different things. I put Nicolas Cage in a generation here, but just in general, as generations evolve, they want different things. So the fact that Heritage was like, yeah, let's see what we can do here. Let's see if we can figure this out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's evolved nicely where a buyer used to be back in the day, an older generational collector, that was buying art. The traditional category is sterling silver, mainly fine art, sterling silver, jewelry at auction. But now we're seeing younger generations buying things like urban art, timepieces, vintage timepieces have been a hot commodity among younger generations. So there's a need there to fill that void of kids wanting to collect fine art or timepieces or urban art. They want a piece from Banksy or Cause. So we've been seeing a lot of, it's this new generation coming into play, bidding on things like baseball cards, sports memorabilia. It's kind of fun to be a fan and go watch a football game or a basketball game and then be able to log on to heritage auctions and say, oh, wait, I can actually buy a jersey or a baseball card of one of my favorite players. And it
Right.
just really in the comfort of my own home in a very open and transparent buying process, where you can pretty much have the world as your oyster as far as starting a collection. So it's been really nice to see, in my been at Heritage just under 12 years. It's really been very cool to see sort of that transition and then in dealing with that transition of collectors, buyers, in my world, in the trust and estates world, we are dealing with the generational wealth transfer of
Mhm.
these old seasoned
That's right.
collectors
That's
who
right.
have kids who might not be interested in the things that they have bought or have inherited. So it's kind of interesting how this all, on the buying side and also on the selling side, how this all has, sort of come full circle.
Yeah. It's funny. We are certainly starting to see we more of that generational wealth transfer. And there is so much of those collections that are getting passed down, and some of them, I think the younger generations are kind of excited about it because they are things that are coming back into style, and then, maybe some others that not so much, which
Yep.
is
Yep.
another reason why, why you might reach out to an auction house to get some help on rehoming some of
Mhm.
those treasured things. Because families tend to have so families of wealth tend to have these big collections. It feels like there's a lot of drama
Mm,
around
mm.
collections.
It's difficult when we start getting into tangible personal property. Um, there's a lot, it's complex
Right.
because you're dealing with, first, what's the value, their valuation challenges. What's the actual value of this item? There's emotional attachment. They hold sentimental value. Um, you can't cut it. I always say in my world, you can't cut a painting in half. So there's always that.
Yeah.
There's like what its ultimate value is. There's distribution issues, who gets what? How do we divide it equally so that there isn't any family dispute and there isn't any drama? And then I encounter a lack of knowledge in a lot of these families where they don't really know what they have. They've never asked the family member, why is this important to you? What is the meaning of this collection? Where did you acquire it? Why does it have value? Why do you think it has value? So there's a lot of that missing and that knowledge missing just about the baseline purpose of the collection and why this family member was so passionate
Right.
collecting it. And then, paperwork. If someone was or an organization, the basics is, if you have a wine cellar, if you have a fine art collection, whatever is your jam, how is it organized? How do you know what you have? If you have objects in it, how does the family know,
Yeah.
what it is? Is there an inventory?
Speaking my
You know
language.
Yes, yes, and management of it, is it
That
something that we have to worry about insuring? Is it fine art that's been hanging in the house near a fireplace or in full sun? Is there
or did it
jewelry
get
on
moved to another property, but somebody forgot to mention that to the insurance company?
Exactly. In my world, that's the issue I always encounter when dealing with assisting families and their advisors as far as estate planning with these types of assets. So there's a lot of unknowns that have to be answered and prepped for. And so we try to help avoid those pitfalls,
Yeah.
which there are many.
There are many. You had talked about a personal property memo. Tell us a little bit, like, how that works alongside of an estate plan and, like, when a family would want that, how it's useful.
Yeah. So it kind of works in tangent with it, the pitfalls that I mentioned, that things that I've seen that are not good, not knowing, failing to plan for distribution, not having a sound plan in your will or a tangible personal property memo to help you decide who gets what. And so, like, having a tangible personal property memo, it's a memorandum, it's very informal. It's just an informal document, legal document that can, let's say, for lack of a better word, it can complement your will or your trust documents. And its sole purpose is to identify what individuals are to receive specific items from the estate. So it just gives you a good, clear instructions who gets that piece of jewelry, artwork, furniture, vehicle, wine, bottle, and you can update it. It allows the owner and the family complete transparency on those items. You sign it, you date it, you share it with your legal team, your estate planning team, your CPA, anybody and everybody. So it for it to be, I did say it was informal, but in order for it to be formal, it needs to be referenced in the will. So you can easily start prepping this document with your family informally, but share it with your estate planning team and include it once you feel it's completed and it has fulfilled everybody's need and your collection is accounted for. Then you can sign it, date it, give it to your estate planning attorney so that they can reference it in your will.
Okay, got it. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then if something changes, you actually buy something new or sell something, that is
sure.
much more easily updated than your will or
Ab- you
other
can
document that's gonna have to have a legal counsel to review. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've done this in seminars where we've talked about estate planning at different levels. And I've had a seminar where we've brought in first gen, second gen, third, everybody. And we've talked about the tangible personal property memo. People don't like you start addressing your mortality, you start thinking about your things. It's just not fun. It's not someone one wants to take the proper time to. But coming from my end of the world, your end of the world, where we've seen these things, not, where there's no planning, there's no fluidity, and then it creates issues, many issues, especially if you do have a collection that's worth significant amounts. Or even if it's not, then the sentimentality of it and the emotional attachment of it
Right.
becomes a major issue. So having a document that clearly identifies the way you want to distribute your collection, where the attorney has a copy of it, it's referred to in the will, that clears all of the issues that we normally, I mean, at least it clears the most of issues that we normally encounter. Because
Right.
what I encounter in our world after the fact, after a matriarch or a patriarch has passed away and they have a collection, whether it be comic books, sports, fine art, it's all handled the same. It's, whether they planned for distribution? Do we know who's getting what? Is there a charitable intent involved? Is there philanthropy you wanted to support? And in order to support it, you need to sell, and the family's all on board with selling the assets? Or are you basing your entire estate plan on an inaccurate valuation? That's another thing we come across. Bad appraisals. Um, or is there documentation unclear? Is there sketchy documents related to this collection? Um, and there's just a lot that can come up. And so if you're doing something as simple as creating this memo, it helps alleviate some of the painful things that can come up when dealing with tangible personal property.
I would also just throw in, because we build a lot of document libraries for families. And if you're going to the trouble of writing things down and where things should go and adding the context so someone knows why something is so sentimental, or why am I choosing, you know, Jen over Jane for this piece of jewelry, well, there may be a very good reason that they did. There might not be. I don't know. She might have just flipped a coin and said, you get one and you get one. But there might also be a real reason behind it. So having that context is, from that perspective, is invaluable, for the people to know that. But also, especially if you have appraisals, finding them, if you had something when you purchased the item, having those things available out of curiosity, because I know Heritage does a lot of appraisals for estate tax work and things like that. Do you recommend families who, if they bought something, I don't know, let's say 20 or 30 years ago, a piece of artwork or jewelry or something, do you actually do you recommend that they have that reappraised every so often? Or
Yeah,
just
we,
curious.
depends on the collection, but, anything from a market like art, which can be volatile at times, we
Right.
definitely suggest getting that object reappraised every 3 to 5 years. It's really something that and you can even look at the sports memorabilia market. It has changed dramatically within the last few years. If you have a piece of sports memorabilia, you might want to consider getting it reappraised every 3 to 5 years as well. So there are certain categories that would benefit from getting reappraised. And also the tangible personal property memo it's kind of like an old school way of doing things, but it gets people talking about things. But I've had clients
Right.
who, walk around with the cell phone, their kids are walking around and, taking photographs and recording. Where did you get this? When did you get it? Why it's important. It's that even can be put into a document. Um,
Absolutely.
and then there are companies that do home inventories,
Mhm.
um, can come in. They're not appraisers. They are not adding a value to it, but they can go through the silver drawer, the porcelain drawer, take a photo of anything and everything in that house, the paperweight tchotchkes, all of it, so that at least there's a visual record of everything in the home. Because also something we encounter, if there is a sick or an elderly, or there was a sickness of the matriarch or patriarch of the family, and there's people going in and out of the house, medical care, you also want the security of knowing, okay,
You're
we
right.
pieces of art and now it has 5. There's ways you don't You can go as formal as you want, which would be hiring an appraisals services company like a Heritage Auctions Appraisal Services Inc. Or you can go as informal as you want and just have a home inventory company come in, take photos, and they have a database that they can share with you. There's some really good ones across the country. Or you can go old school and just record on your own and fill out that tangible personal property memo and get it to your attorney. So there's ways around it, but what I find the challenge is actually getting someone to the place mentally and emotionally to start thinking about that.
Yeah. I will say it is, after someone is gone, the if you had the opportunity to walk around their home with them and
Mhm.
say, "Mom, Dad, Grandma, Grandpa, uncle, aunt, whoever, tell me about this piece." To have that down the road it's just such a lovely thing to have, and you can't capture that information, and certainly not that person telling you about the story and giving you the history and "Oh, I was in Milan when we bought this, and
Right.
it was such a love." I mean, it just those are the kinds of things that I would love to see more families do. For lots and lots of reasons, but
Sure.
certainly
Well,
I love that you mentioned just walking around the house and doing a video and, having them talk a little bit about stuff because that's irreplaceable footage,
yeah. And
literally.
we've had clients who have done that with their families where all of a sudden the family realizes, oh, that painting that has been hanging there has some interesting provenance. It was owned by such and such, you know?
Right.
And that is vital information for whatever venue you've selected to sell or even for the appraiser because there's more information about that object, especially provenance, which is hard to dig up after someone has passed away, and can add value to that object.
Ah,
So it
that's another
can.
reason to have context.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So it really helps knowing while they are living and alive and ready and able to answer all questions to get them to start talking about these objects that you've been surrounded by your entire life. And that's what we hope we can relay, especially in opportunities like this, is that estate planning should happen sooner rather than later. And there are companies that can help you make this a really smooth, streamlined process for everyone involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Perfect example. I was sitting on the couch at our grandmother's house just a couple around Thanksgiving, and I said, "Meemaw, what are those? What are that? Remind me what those lights are that are up around the fireplace." Oh, well, those were dug up from my great 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 grandparents, and your papa switched it over from the certain like gas that it used over to electric about 10 years ago, or I don't know, it was longer than that. But it was
Mhm.
just so interesting, and to hear Mima tell the full story, I was like, "Oh, yeah, those are really special."
And that's
Yeah,
special. And now you know. And,
and now I know.
I've been called, now you know. And I've been called. What we do in our department is if there is a death in the family, we will go and do a walkthrough with the family members or the advisors handling the estate.
Yeah,
And we will go look and see what we can help them with, whether we're called on for appraisal services in case of it is taxable and they're filing an estate tax return and they need an appraisal, or if they are interested in using our auction services and the family would like to sell, then we will go and look and see what are the best things that Heritage can handle. But I've been in those situations where I've been called for, let's say, the family. Well, in this instance, they were fine art collectors, and that's what their kids were like. You have Heritage has to come look at our parents' fine art collection. That's what we're going to sell. But while I was there, I said, "Did your parents collect anything else?" And I said, "No, no, no. It's just fine art. That's all we need your help with." And I said, "Well, was your mother?" It was the matriarch that passed away. Her husband had predeceased her. And I said, "Well, did your mother wear jewelry?" And they said, "Of course." And I said, "Well, I'm sure she wore good jewelry." And they're like, "She wore really good jewelry, but that's unfortunate." And I was floored. And I said, "Of course it is." And the attorney who was there, he was like, "Yes, you didn't." He told kids, "You didn't mention the jewelry." And she said, "Wow, there's a safe in the closet." And there was, about another 1.5 to $2 million worth of jewelry in that vault alone that they had no idea that, because they had just thought traditional fine art is the only thing people collect. But jewelry is a collection, porcelain, sterling silver. So it's kind of like getting out of that mindset, out of the traditional categories and only what you hang on the walls has value. It's not the case. And so I'm always reminding people, basically closets, handbags now is a huge
Mm.
market for
Yes.
luxury accessories. That it helps to learn more, and not everything can be put into that box of fine art only. Not these days.
Yeah. Michelle, as we are wrapping up our conversation, do you have any practical takeaways that if someone is listening and they heard nothing else that we said, but they hear this at the end, what are some of those things that you would want them to leave with?
I would say first, start having the conversations, honest conversations. Start being inquisitive with your family members and find out what is hanging on the walls, what's in the closet, what is hanging at dad's office, what does all that signed sports memorabilia mean? And, what's in the wine cellar? What are those first edition books doing in the library? Start having those conversations now. Because more than likely, your kids are not going to want any of this stuff because they have their own style, they have their own design influences. They might not like to collect the type of art you collected. So, having those conversations now is helpful. And then determine goals for that collection. Are you charitably inclined? If the kids don't want it and everyone has discussed what there is in the home and no one's into it, then let's get that next gen involved by creating a charitable goal with the collection. Or do we sell it all and distribute it now as we start downsizing and
Right?
minimizing our life as we get into our fabulous retirement years? Do
Right?
we start looking at a plan now? And I've seen a lot of that happening. Or let's do the split up. Okay, you're very interested in our collection. I've got 3 kids. Let's start talking about how we distribute this so that everyone's happy. It's a level playing field, which means if we want to equitably distribute it to you amongst our beneficiaries, our kids, then we should get a fair market value appraisal today rather than later and start planning on, we have a valuation, and kind of have the kids look at it and say, okay, so here's what everything is valued at today. And, kind of start looking at what you actually might want. And then, you know, the advisors, the head of the families, then they know where the interest level is and what they have to do with the objects that have zero interest among the family. And then it will also show the kids what the value is. So, yeah, I want that piece of art, but if that piece of art has a fair market value of $1 million, that means your sister and brother, in order to equitably distribute it,
Uh-huh.
y'all
That's
better
right.
come up. Yeah, y'all better come up with another piece of art, jewelry, wine that adds up
Of
to that.
Mhm.
So I think, and I've had many instances where that happens. So that's important. And you can do that now. And then, make sure the documentation is all there. Make sure that family legacy, where they bought it, how they bought it, when they inherited it, who they bought it from. If they were buying at auction 70 years ago, 60 years ago, okay, tell me where, even
Right.
if it was in Europe. So getting all of that information now is really good, especially when we're moving into this major wealth transfer. where most of these baby boomers have significant collections and most of their children and beneficiaries will not want it. So we have been seeing a boom in our department in our appraisals division for people doing just this, planning ahead. Advisors are really harping down on these families and saying we should really get an appraisal for estate planning or financial planning purposes and start getting an idea of fair market values now. No one has to die yet. No one said died. But what use plan now, and we
Right.
can do that. So those are, I think, those are what I would recommend
Okay.
families those are, I think, the go-tos that you can do now. It could actually be a lot of fun starting to get involved and seeing what is in the home and start talking to your parents, grandparents about it. Um, and then you can really see what is laid out and how best to plan. It helps the advisors, it helps the family, and it helps everybody, the people like me, you down the road.
Yeah.
When something does happen and everything is nicely laid out, it really helps ease all of the tension.
Yeah, really does make a huge difference. Michelle, thank you so much for your time today. I am going to make sure to link not only to Heritage Auctions, but also to your LinkedIn and give people a way to contact you if they are interested in reaching out and having a conversation.
Thank you so
So,
much for having me. I'm so glad you're having this topic and conversation with other peers who are in the auction business. I think this is so timely and it's very educational, and I was thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you.
thank you for joining me today on the Family Office Success Podcast. I hope you found this conversation insightful and valuable as you navigate the complexities of family office services. If you're looking for more ideas or resources or want to explore how we can support your family office or your family through services and training and strategy, connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at whiteriverconsultants.com and be sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates and expert insights. And if you're ready to take your family office to the next level, consider joining our mastermind where we can help you manage that chaos and create better outcomes for the families you serve. Until next time, I'm Christy Van Wright, and this has been the Family Office Success Podcast. Take care and keep building for the future.